Richard Trenton Chase is a name that conjures images of evil and terror. Into his twisted story, you must plunge. Chase, who was born in Sacramento, California, committed unspeakable acts as his life took a dark turn. Come with us as we explore the sick mind of the Vampire of Sacramento, from the first indications of his mental illness to the gory details of his killings. As we delve into the shadowy parts of Chase's life and the eerie legacy he left behind, be ready for a story that muddles the boundaries between insanity and evil. In Sacramento, California, Richard Trenton Chase came into this world on May 23, 1950. Between December 1977 and January 1978, he killed 6 people in Sacramento, California. He was a cannibal and necrophile from the United States. He had a reputation as the Vampire of Sacramento because he feasted on the blood and flesh of his victims. The 3 features of the McDonald Triad, a hypothesis that proposes the possible development of aggressive psychopathic behavior, were present in him as early as 5 years old. As a youth, he allegedly took narcotics often. He attended American River College after finishing high school and kept his grade point average in the C's. Richard Trenton Chase began to exhibit symptoms of hypochondria in his later years. Illness anxiety disorder, or hypochondria, is characterized by an unhealthy fixation on potential health problems, despite the lack of evidence to back up this belief in medicine. There was a pattern to his frequent statements about his heart suddenly stopping or someone snatching his pulmonary artery. He used to believe that the vitamin C in oranges would permeate his brain by holding them above his head. Chase assumed his skull had cracked open and was moving, so he shaved it so he could observe this action. A brief hospitalization occurred for Chase in 1973. In 1976, after putting rabbit blood into his veins, he was taken to a hospital and then committed to a mental institution against his will. His workers affectionately dubbed him Dracula due to his unhealthy preoccupation with blood. He brutally slaughtered 2 birds he had captured through the window of the facility, causing them to bleed to death. He also drew blood from therapy dogs using stolen syringes. Medications for mental health issues were among the several therapies that led to Chase's diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. After an evaluation in 1976 confirmed that Chase did not represent a danger to the community, he was placed back in his mother's custody. Weaning Chase off of his medicine and getting him his own apartment were both accomplished by his mother. After Chase's roommates left, he found himself living alone in the flat. Later investigation located Chase's 1977 arrest and subsequent detention on a reserve close to Pyramid Lake, Nevada. There were several blood-stain patterns all over his body, and his truck had a pail of blood. No official charges were filed once it was determined that the blood was indeed cow's blood. Chase murdered Ambrose Griffin, his first known victim, on December 29, 1977. Arden Arcade was the largest residential district in Sacramento, where he lived as an engineer for the Bureau of Land Management. Around 8:30 p.m. one evening, Ambrose, Carol, and their daughter-in-law Gail were returning home following a trip to the grocery shop. Ambrose handed Carol the keys to the trunk, and she proceeded to remove a bag. Ambrose snatched 2 bags as Gail unlocked the front door. Before going back to the driveway to get the last bag, Ambrose set the bags on the kitchen counter. As he stood outside, his family could hear a vehicle pulling up. It went by at high speed before slowing down and making 2 deafening pops as if it were a car backfiring. The engine grumbled as the vehicle sped away. Carol glanced out the window as she heard her husband fall to the floor. Despite Ambrose's feeble claims of being shot, Carol mistook them for a heart attack. Because of the shocking nature of the situation, she still had trouble believing that he had been shot, despite the deafening din of gunfire. Until the ambulance came and removed Ambrose off the ground, no one saw the blood on his shirt. His wounds were now plainly visible to everyone. It was concerning that Ambrose's blood pressure was 40/0 when he arrived at American River Hospital via ambulance. The 51-year-old husband, father, and World War II veteran Ambrose was pronounced dead 40 minutes after reaching the hospital. Despite the efforts of the emergency room personnel and a transfusion, Tragically, the fatal bullet killed him by penetrating his diaphragm and lung, causing him to lose too much blood. To clarify, there was a brief incident involving a drive-by shooting. The second explosion they heard indicated that the bullet had ricocheted off of Ambrose and into the nearby tree. Consequently, he did not survive being shot once. A first investigation led law enforcement to believe that Ambrose Griffin's shooting death was unintentional and the result of wild shots. A solid lead did not materialize for over 1 month. He returned to the woman's residence 2 weeks later, but this time he departed after seeing that the doors were shut. Unlocked doors, according to Chase's later testimony to investigators, meant an invitation to enter, while closed ones meant he was not welcome. Once, on his way home, a couple saw him taking their belongings. They chased him away after he puked all over their baby's clothing and bed, and threw up. Chase stormed into Teresa Wallen's house on January 23, 1978, and shot her 3 times. Wallen was 3 months pregnant at the time. Having killed her with a butcher's knife, he then had sex with her body. His next move was to remove many organs, drink her blood, and then hack off one of her nipples. Prior to his departure, he forcefully injected her with dog feces collected from Wallen's yard. Chase broke into the house of 38-year-old Evelyn Miroth on January 27th. He approached Danny Meredith, who was her buddy, and shot him in the back with his .22 revolver. He murdered Miroth, her son Jason, who was 6 years old, and her nephew David Ferreira, who was 22 months old. He then dismembered Miroth's body and engaged in necrophilia and cannibalism on it. A knock on the door frightened Chase, who then escaped in Meredith's car with Ferreira's corpse. A neighbor was informed by the guest, who in turn contacted the authorities. Complete prints of Chase's hands and shoes were discovered in Miroth's blood. After quickly apprehending Chase, the police conducted a search of his residence and found blood on the walls, floor, ceiling, fridge, and even in the dishes and glasses. Richard Chase maintained his innocence throughout. By notifying him that they had fingerprints, ballistic evidence, and shoe prints, the detectives hoped to diminish his determination. Then, as if to begin speaking, he emerged from his shell. He went on to confess to murdering other dogs in the ballistics lab after admitting to shooting the first dog. Chase was unmoved by the mounting evidence, even though his .22 caliber pistol matched the one used in the 6 killings. The next day, they dispatched bloodhounds to Chase's apartment building, but they came up empty-handed. When they spoke with the facility he had escaped from, they learned that he would slaughter animals, even bunnies. He was found with blood on his mouth and had murdered 2 birds by snatching them through the bars of his room, bringing them inside, cracking their necks, and consuming their blood. So, is he a carnivore? The medical personnel began referring to him as Dracula at that point. In the end, Chase would confess to a jailhouse trustee and, finally, to the psychiatrist who interviewed him during his trial before sentencing. After gaining his independence, Chase began abducting animals, torturing them until they died, and then eating their blood, as he told them. He said that he would occasionally eat the pets of his neighbors when no one was around. One of the ladies he murdered, Dorothy Polensky, was shot by him in December 1977, and he admitted to shooting Ambrose Griffin as well. The murdering spree allegedly started when he slipped into a deep depression. He obviously had no ulterior motive. He simply did it for the pleasure of murdering and eating blood. He was certain he was a vampire. Robert K. Ressler allegedly had repeated interviews with Chase, according to a separate account. According to these interviews, he has been associated with a terrible group known as Nazis and UFOs. Despite his killings, he justified them by saying he had no choice but to do what was necessary to stay alive, something he thought everyone would have to do, and by expressing his worries about this group. In order to bring the Nazi UFO pilots to justice for the deaths, he begged Ressler for permission to use a radar gun. In addition, he shared with Ressler a big package of macaroni and cheese that he had been concealing in his trousers pockets because he believed the prison guards were working with the Nazis to poison him. You may recall that the authorities are still looking for the whereabouts of Ferreira, the infant whose body was never found. After he started admitting, they questioned him about what happened, and he claimed to have eaten the baby's brains. While many suffer from paranoid schizophrenia, few have committed crimes on the scale of Richard Chase's. He is, without a question, the sickest criminal I have ever heard of. In May of 1979, among other charges, Chase was found guilty of 6 counts of first-degree murder. More than 100 witnesses testified against Chase during his trial. Despite his attorney's requests for leniency, the death penalty was imposed on Chase in a California gas chamber due to his history of mental illness and their attempt to claim insanity. But he would never make it to the gas chamber. Upon his arrival at San Quentin, his fellow inmates began to fear him. The savage, aggressive, and hardened inmates of San Quentin were frightened of Richard Chase. Could you possibly hold it against them? Indeed, what transpired? Could they have killed him? Like many other child killers in jail, he was regarded as a marked man and wanted dead because of the children he had murdered. Even the thought of getting too near to him to kill him was enough to frighten these inmates. Thus, they attempted to persuade him to do it himself, and he dutifully did so. He accumulated antidepressants and committed suicide by overdosing. No, it occurred on the night of December 26, 1980, which is only 3 days before the 3rd anniversary of Ambrose Griffin's murder. In the course of his usual cell inspection, a guard discovered Chase asleep and contorted on his bed. Afterward, he was removed from his cell and pronounced dead. The autopsy verified his overdose. He had stored them for 3 weeks before devouring the whole amount in one sitting. The story of the Sacramento vampire is now over. Nothing changes, even though it does help to know that he killed his victims first, before tormenting them. Having said that, it is reassuring to know that most victims did not endure the torment for very long. How many bodies does he have in total? It is very heartbreaking that all of the creatures were brutally murdered, especially considering his rampage. Wow, that's terrible. Richard Chase, the vampire of Sacramento, had a disordered mind in the late 1970s and caused havoc in his frightening narrative. The horrors of Chase's spiral into insanity, including his cannibalism and vampire accusations, continue to terrify this day. Reflect on the disturbing question: what kind of justice is appropriate for a monster like this, given their serious mental condition? As we draw to a conclusion on this gloomy chapter, come contemplate alongside us, voice your opinions, and hold on to more captivating stories. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the crime narrative. From your point of view, what is the status of this case? Does he really merit death, given his mental condition? In your role as judge, what sanction do you think he should have received? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section or write an email to crimesabroad@outlook.com and follow this page for further updates by clicking the like and subscribe buttons.